for allowing it to use it every month for these discussions. Tulare County Voices is an open forum, and we invite questions and participation from you, the audience. We have a terrific panel and I think program for you tonight on a subject that is gradually increasing in importance in the news and in our world. Avian flu, or what is the talk? H1N5 or H1N9 or HPAI, or bird flu. So I'd like to start out with just pop quiz. Who looks like they're smart enough to answer this question? Donna. Donna, what was the price of a dozen eggs at Costco this week? Now, that's kind of a trick question because obviously Costco does not sell eggs by the dozen. But if they did, what would be the price of eggs at Costco this week?
I've heard $7.
That's for 2 dozen? Oh, I don't know. Actually, it was a very much a trick question because they're not selling eggs at Costco this week. They put a sign up earlier this week, or certainly last week, that said, "We're out of eggs." We got 9, we got 10. Do I hear 11? $9 to save Martin Arnan. Okay. Anyway, so you have all experienced tangible effects of the subject that we're going to talk about tonight, bird flu. Farmers market, $8. Okay. Do we have any others so we can put this behind us? The price of eggs behind us, because I know it's what. That was in my lead of the story I wrote for the Times Delta and the Sun Gazette. So, don't blame me. But that's what we're talking about tonight. Not just avian flu, but its effects on our world. And we're in an unusual position here in the Central Valley because our world includes the biggest agricultural territory in the country, maybe the world. Eggs and poultry are not our biggest crop. In fact, I think they're probably in the second 10. Chris, something like that?
I am verifying right now.
Okay. Good thing we have somebody who knows what they're talking about. But they're important, and it's just not for eggs either. It's dairy, which is the number one commodity in Tulare County. So this is important to us. It's important for our ag industry, for our economy as a whole, because anything that happens in ag in Tulare County affects all of our businesses, banks, transportation, tourism, real estate, and a number of other things. It's the driver of us all. And then, of course, our personal health. Because as we know from what happened about 5 years ago, something like this can morph into a crisis, as we found out in the last pandemic. And we're going to explore a little bit about, is that possible with H1N5, or is it H5N1? Dr. Patesky, you're going to, okay, it's right behind me. All right, let me introduce our panel before we get going here. On the left is Dr. Maurice Patesky. His name is misspelled on that placard. It's not his fault. I think he's probably learned how to spell his name by now. I wouldn't have, but he has. Dr. Patesky is a veterinarian and a researcher and analyst from University of California, Davis, and his specialty is HPAI, highly pathological avian influenza.
Highly pathogenic.
Highly pathogenic, not pathological.
Influenza, yeah.
I'm pathological. I think it's highly pathogenic avian influenza. And we are delighted to have him here tonight, and because he did come down from Davis, and he's here for that little party they're having down the road, World Ag Expo. So thanks for joining us. To his left, going to the right, Dr. Sharon Minnick is representing the Tulare County Health and Human Services Agency, specifically in the area of public health. I wasn't sure about your exact title. Something like Deputy Director of...
I'm Senior Epidemiologist.
Senior Epidemiologist. See, that's why I didn't put in there, because I don't know how to spell that. Next to him, Assistant Tulare County Ag Commissioner Chris Greer. Chris, thank you for being here. And another good get to our little group tonight, who's also in Tulare County for World Ag Expo, Anya Rodabau, and I think we spelled her name right. I probably didn't pronounce it right, but she is with Western United Dairies, or is it Growers? Western United Dairies. So she's going to talk a little bit about what the effect of this has been on our and all dairy industries, I guess, really. Let's start by asking Dr. Patesky to brief us a little bit on the science of avian flu. Where's it come from? How's it propagated? Where do we go from here?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here. And it's great to see your community so involved in this. It's not the best subject, but we are where we are. I'm just going to show a few slides. I'm a professor, so death by PowerPoint is not my intention here, but I do our lab does a lot of mapping. And hopefully that can help give you guys just a very kind of general sense of where we are. You can kind of see the bullet points. So Homo sapiens, what we are, we've been around 300,000 years. We've been hunter-gatherers for 290,000 years, and for the last 10,000 years, we've been sedentary, agricultural revolution, stuff like that. No matter how you measure it, this is the largest animal disease outbreak of the last 10,000 years. So we're dealing with something historic. No matter what you look at, geography, species affected, et cetera, et cetera. We're dealing with an endemic disease at this point. So from a regulatory perspective, they don't want to use that word, but we are dealing with something that's probably here to stay. Just like with our flu, it's seasonal, and we are going to get this kind of ebb and flow most likely for the foreseeable future. And I think one of the things, as a academic, I just haven't seen like someone really say this is the plan kind of moving forward. What we've done for 3+ years is obviously not working. It's worked in previous outbreaks, but I think we need to be a little more creative, bolder. Unfortunately, we need to collaborate more, and that's a real challenge, especially during pandemics and animal versions of pandemics. There are no easy solutions. So apple cider vinegar, whatever you read online. I have so many people emailing and calling me about so many different elixirs that they want to hawk on people. And then if we get out of this, it'll be in spite of us, not because of us, unfortunately, at this point. That map you see behind us, that's the U.S. split into 4,500 or so counties. All those colors just represent where we found different types of high path AI, wild birds, domestic birds, wild mammals, et cetera, et cetera. So it's everywhere. And if you looked at a world map, aside from Australia, that's pretty much what you would see. Just very, very briefly, waterfowl are migratory. So in the Central Valley of California, we have about 6 to 8 million waterfowl right now. By the summer, we'll be down to 600,000 waterfowl, and that's why it's kind of more of a seasonal type disease. But when those ducklings and goslings hatch in the Arctic and come back down again in the fall, that's, unfortunately how the virus keeps on cycling. And because our globe is spherical and these different migratory pathways interface with each other, we have the potential to get new versions of the virus into the Central Valley. So imagine right now 8 million waterfowl. Also imagine about 1,000 dairies in the Central Valley and about 600 poultry facilities. All those spatially overlap, and that's how diseases are moving from this kind of wild bird population, primarily ducks and geese, into our domestic commercial food animals. Just really briefly, that farm that you see on the left and the right. So I do a lot of disease modeling using radar and telemetry stuff we can talk about another time. But when you see that farm A and farm B, those are that's the same exact farm in November of 2023 versus November of 2024. The one on the right, the red one, that's high waterfowl density right around that farm. The one on the left, same exact farm, November the year before, no waterfowl around there. And the point I'm trying to make is that the farms don't change, but the risk does change based upon the environment, the climate, moisture, rain, all that kind of stuff. So the tool that I work on the right, you can basically rank farms based on waterfowl abundance and high path AI presence or absence, and try to kind of make a list or triage of which farms have the highest risk to them. So if we have, if I'm a big poultry company or a big dairy company, whatever, I can look at my farms and decide which ones have the highest risk associated with them. And that gives, in my mind, farmers kind of a fighting chance to understand where the risk is highest as far as disease introduction. And then this is Tulare Lake. So we had some extraordinary actions around Tulare Lake as far as the amount of rain that we had. And what you can see on the right there is, if you look at where those red on both of those maps, when you shift to the right, that's after the rains. And if you look at the on the left, that's before the rains. And that just points out that when we have these kind of events in our environment, that changes the habitat in the region, which changes the risk in the region. So this area of Tulare, with all the historic rain that we got last, was it 2 winters ago now, I believe, that was extraordinary, and that created a brand new habitat in Tulare that lake hasn't really been reconstituted for a while. And then the last thing I really want to point out is this is Nevada. So some extraordinary things happened in Nevada at the beginning of January. Or excuse me, at the end of January. And I just want to point out there were 6 dairies that got hit with high path AI. If you look on your that bottom right side with the white circle around it, that's a lake. That's where those red areas are where the waterfowl are hanging out. Waterfowl like water. Nevada's very dry. And if you look at those white circles above there, that's where the waterfowl went, which are these dairies. And if you zoom in even further to see where they're going on these dairies, they're going to where the feed is being stored, where the alfalfa and other feed is being stored. So this is just a really dramatic example. We had 6 dairies hit, a dairy worker, at least one dairy worker that was sick, and the waterfowl go from the habitat, water, to where there's feed, and they just go back and forth until they migrate again up into the in the summer. So this is kind of a microcosm of kind of what's going on in California is a little different, but this is kind of the reality that we're dealing with, is that we have to be able to thread this needle between growing food, because we have a lot of mouths to feed, and we have more mouths to feed in the next couple decades, and we also have to think about conservation for habitat for all these wild species of birds, and that threading that needle is a real challenge. There's ways to do that, but we haven't really invested in that for a while. So with that, I think when you think about the virus, just remember that that's that spatial interface between these wild ducks and geese that are the main reservoir of the virus. There's other species that carry it, and when they spatially overlap and interface with our domestic food animals, that's usually how disease is transmitted, even though the dairy example in California at this point is a little different as far as moving dairy to dairy to dairy based on kind of husbandry practices that are being used right now. But I think we are going to have this scenario happen where we're going to start having more wild bird to dairy spillover events in California and beyond.
So it's at least with poultry and fowl, it's transmitted through feed, mostly. No?
It's transmitted from basically wild birds that are creating aerosols when they're flying. They're dropping their feces.
Okay.
They're yeah. That's how we think it's primarily transmitted, through an aerosol route from wild waterfowl that are infected.
Okay. Good. And obviously, it's more virulent with birds than it is with mammals.
Correct. Yeah. So the most birds, especially domestic birds, when they get infected, as the name implies, it's highly pathogenic. They'll die, and the dogma is if we depopulate or euthanize any of the birds that are in that facility, the virus can't persist, and then we can prevent further transmission of the virus to other flocks. So the depopulation, what we do in poultry, we're close to 150 million birds have been depopulated since the beginning of the outbreak in 2022. That's primarily focused on preventing the virus from spreading further.
I love that term, depopulated.
Good euphemism.
Yeah, that's a nice name for murder. I have to remember that next time I want to murder somebody. I'm just going to depopulate you. I don't know why I'm looking at you, Mom. That's pretty much the cure, is to eliminate your flocks.
Yeah. So so in my mind, we've spent, if you look at how we're spending our money, we've spent billions of dollars on high-path AI, and the majority of that money has been spent in a reactive kind of scenario where we spend it on detecting the virus, we spend it on depopulation, cleaning and disinfection, indemnification, where the farmer gets basically reimbursed, and that's a very reactive kind of approach, which I'm supportive of, but we don't do anything proactive. So in my mind, and I'm biased, but the modeling that I do identifies which farms are at highest risk. So in a perfect world, what you want to do is you want to be able to identify, of those 1,000 dairies, those 600 poultry facilities, which ones historically in real time and forecasted, just like a weather report, we can have a waterfowl high-path AI report, and we can identify which of those farms have the highest waterfowl abundance, high-path AI risk around them. And then we can use those data, the veterinarians and the farmers can use those data to protect and harden those specific facilities. If you talk to someone from USDA or other agencies, they're going to be like, well, you need maximum biosecurity. And to me, that kind of flies in the face of human behavior. Mm-hmm. No veterinarian, no farmer can do quote unquote maximum biosecurity every day. So to me, giving them information about which of their farms and when those farms and where those farms are having the biggest risk, that's a piece of information that can be used to kind of triage your efforts.
Yeah, well, you got three other panelists here, and I'm going to ask them the same question, and I wouldn't be surprised if I get different answers. But as far as prevention goes, I mean, we can't inoculate birds. What is the
So there are vaccines.
procedure?
So Southeast Asia, China, Egypt, those are countries that have pretty robust vaccination programs. There's economic ramifications of that, but France, for example, has been vaccinating their domestic ducks, and just within the last week or so, and I'm not a regulatory or trade person, but just within the last week, I think the U.S. now is allowing French ducks to be traded into the U.S., which seems to kind of start nudging us toward moving toward a vaccine. I'm supportive of a vaccine. The only thing you have to be careful with a vaccination is that if the vaccine doesn't match the virus, because the virus evolves, then you're just wasting time and energy. So we don't have a robust enough surveillance approach in our wild birds, in my opinion, to really roll out vaccine. But I think we're probably just going to roll out vaccine because we're human, and this is sometimes we have to learn things the hard way. And then the other thing with vaccination, as we know from COVID, vaccines protect against disease. They don't protect against infection. So the reality is there was just a paper that came out about a week ago or so that suggested that in China, that one of the proteins, the hemagglutinin protein, seems to evolve a little faster in vaccinated, when the commercial birds are vaccinated, which from a public health perspective could lead to more potential versions of the virus that could potentially affect other species, including us. So nothing's free.
Wow, fascinating. This is a worldwide infestation. Birds fly around, I've heard. Yeah. Which countries are having the biggest problem, and which ones are using the most promising responses?
Yeah, so we are the centroid of California, the Central Valley.
Yes.
Yeah, we're number one right now, unfortunately. I have been spending some time going overseas in Southeast Asia, Middle East, and Europe with the goal of trying to create a global surveillance tool. It's hard to get accurate information from everyone. We're not collaborating. This virus requires collaboration because they're migratory and they go thousands of miles. So it's a little hard to tell, but I know that the countries that vaccinate swear by it, but it's a little hard to tell what the actual results are at this point. And we're dealing with a virus that keeps on evolving, so matching the vaccine with these variants is going to be important moving forward.
Yeah, it's kind of a typical response to virus infestations, like we learned from the last one. Any questions so far? What's that? I will. I'm going to ask if anybody would like a question specifically for Dr. Patesky. See, I knew it.
Is there a test available
Yeah.
for farmers to determine if it's around?
We do have a mic out there that you can use. Yeah, there'll be a small charge. Small charge.
Is there a test available for farmers? Like every home has a COVID test kit.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we do have actually on the farm, we actually have a pretty robust, I can't speak to the dairies just because I'm not familiar with how they're doing all their surveillance, but in commercial poultry, we've had a very kind of robust surveillance approach. The big problem being that the birds have to get sent to a diagnostic lab, and there's obviously some time associated with that. There are several companies that have kind of the equivalent of real-time tests that can be used on site, but I don't know if any of those have formally been approved yet by this governing body that does this type of stuff. But we do have tests, and we actually, to our credit, we have a very robust diagnostic lab system in California. Including a very large kind of branch of the California Animal Health and Food Safety Lab that's based in Tulare that is amazing, and it's a brand new facility that is state of the art.
If a bird dies in the wild areas, and a mammal, if an infected bird dies and a mammal ingests it, or an amphibian or whatever, will they contract the disease?
Yeah, so another really, really good question. So if you look at some of these dairies, we have seen a lot of feral cats that have died near these dairies. Now, there's two explanations for that. They're eating, they're consuming raw milk, and raw milk has the highest viral load. So that's one explanation. The other one is the feral cats are kind of munching on wild birds like snow geese that have died. But we have several examples of that kind of scenario. So if we were in the South right now, we would really be talking about vultures. And vultures farmers are terrified of vultures in the South, maybe more so than waterfowl because there's just more habitat for them there. But the vultures are munching on the dead waterfowl, and then they can transmit disease to the farms that way.
Can humans contract this illness, and how easy or hard is it to do?
Yeah, so if we were having this conversation a year ago, I kind of would have hemmed and hawed and been like, there's just a handful of infections, but we have to be careful with this virus because there have been some H5N1s in Southeast Asia that have had very high mortality. But now we're dealing with something that I tell backyard enthusiasts, for backyard chickens, for example, I tell them they should be wearing surgical masks just out of a precaution of safety because birds create aerosols, and we're having a lot of backyards that are starting to get affected. But kind of the tip of the spear, it's an occupational hazard primarily for dairy and poultry workers. And I don't think people know exactly what's going on other than we're seeing a lot of eye infections. And I think there's challenges trying to figure out how to best protect those workers. A lot of those workers are undocumented, so there's challenges with the type of surveillance. I think the worst case scenario is we're going to have some of these workers that live in multi-familial, multi-generational homes, and the worry is that if they bring home a virus and that virus evolves and mutates and becomes human-to-human transmission, that we're going to not be able to control this before it starts spreading further.
I have read about at least one mutation with H1N9, I think, How many have there been?
Ooh, so I'm not a gene jockey, so I haven't been keeping
ballpark.
I haven't been keeping track of that. But it's an RNA virus, so it evolves. Has a lot of potential to evolve. It also can reassort in all kinds of interesting ways. And we have, the two. I'm a grouper, not a splitter when it comes to this stuff, just because I can't keep track of all the different versions. But there's these two main genotypes: a B genotype and a D genotype. And the dairy folks, especially in California, are most concerned with the B genotype, and then the wild birds are primarily carrying the D genotype. What happened in Nevada, that was the D genotype. That's what made that really unique, and the dairy worker got the D genotype also. But I think there's been at least 5 to 6 introductions into North America, separate introductions from wild birds.
Yeah, it's kind of what I was going for.
Yeah.
That, doctor, was an outstanding explanation of the science of what we're dealing with. So thank you very much. Let's go to how it's being applied now. First of all, Chris Greer in Tulare County Assistant Ag Commissioner. What have you seen in local farms, especially dairies, obviously, and how you monitor it and what you're doing about it?
Thank you for that. I'm a little nervous because my 5th grade teacher is in the audience, and I don't want to embarrass myself on that.
If you'd like to point her out, we can have her removed.
No, yeah.
Or
We're good.
depopulated.
Yeah, depopulated. So at the local level, since this is such a widespread in California, it really falls into California Department of Food and Agriculture, Animal Health branch. We have assisted in many different facets. More so is because we have the boots on the ground at the local level, and Tulare County being the largest milk producing county in California and practically United States, we've assisted with many of PPE distributions with public health. I think even the CDC came down wondering why we gave so much PPE out. We've had many different events at our office to provide that PPE. For all of you that may have not ever worked on a dairy or been to one, the virus, and I'm not a scientist by any means, so please correct me, both doctors and Anya. When you're milking the virus more so mastitizes in the udder, and if you guys are familiar with dairy cattle, they have a large udder, probably the largest udder of all mammals, and so we're milking it to provide fresh milk for all the citizens of the world. And so when we're milking it, it's not a perfect science. It splashes up. Cows, are animals, they sneeze and whatnot. So if they do have the virus, the milkers are in there, inches from the cattle. And so we are providing that PPE so that any sneezes from the cattle, the milk, and as a doctor mentioned, the highest level of that raw milk, that non-homogenized milk, is kind of has the highest potential. And so having that mask or eye protection is really vital. Again, as Dr. Jones, the state veterinarian, has mentioned many times, the first introduction kind of often happens as conjunctive eyes or pink eye or something like that, because it's oftentimes a sneeze in the eye or milk splash in the eye. And so again, we've worked with CDFA to kind of distribute and talk to the dairymen. I don't know if everyone enjoys government interaction as much as the next person, but especially local government, it's a little bit more trusted in overall. And so we've been able to distribute information out to dairymen saying, hey, we have PPE. Hey, please go on this call to learn more about it. Especially being such a high dairy county, we have not even just milk production, we have a very large dairy show industry too. So there's many different dairies within Tulare County that are award-winning throughout the world in their genetics and dairy, and so they're moving those cattle throughout the world, different shows and whatnot, and so they're just as important as the actual milk production too. And so we have been more of a hub for information distributing that out to the dairymen and the local agriculture industry to let them know what there is available, if there is, and especially in the poultry industry, if there is not identification, but reimbursement for depopulation of their poultry. And so we've kind of been that more hub. Go ahead. Did you
I
have a
would think
question?
that's a pretty easy sell to dairies to get them to use masks and gloves, et cetera, and take as much precautions as they can. No?
You would think. I mean, it's kind of the same thing, and we all had some sort of hesitancy during COVID, right? There was a group
Yeah,
of
that's
people
true.
that wanted to wear masks, that didn't wear masks. In the wintertime, it's not a big deal to wear a mask and face. But when you're in a barn when it's 115 degrees outside and there's only fans cooling it, and you have that, when you're working outside, it's not the easiest too, and it's not the easiest too when you're washing your hands every single time after every cow. It can be a lot, and we all, we may have all had employees at one point, and making sure their employees are following the same rules that you want to, it can be challenging. And so again, having that knowledge base and sharing that information has been our biggest kind of push towards assistance in this.
Yeah, I forgot for a second you're dealing with humans.
Yeah. Yes.
And I saw Anya nodding her head over there while you're talking about. Yeah, sometimes it's hard to convince people to do what's best for them. How much have how many dairy herds have been exposed, infected, et cetera? What kind of effect has there been on the local industry?
Did you want to take that, Anya? Please.
Sure. So there's been 744 herds in California that have been quarantined and affected by the virus. As of today, 280 have been released from quarantine. In order to be released from quarantine, you need to test negative for 3 consecutive weeks, every single day. So we talked earlier, there was a question about what surveillance happens on dairies. Every dairy's bulk tank is being tested today. And so the HPI EAI surveillance, sorry, I feel like my mic's cutting in and out. Can you guys hear me?
Maybe switch with Chris for a second. He didn't have any trouble.
Chris doesn't have any trouble articulating anything, which I love about him. So because there was such a feverish outbreak in poultry, the California Department of Food and Ag had wonderful surveillance techniques that they were able to deploy. The challenge was, I think, that when we saw this virus mutate and start to cleave to the mammary tissue in cattle at the end of 2023, there was widespread fear amongst the dairy industry and our workers that it really wasn't that big of a deal. And I think that for the wave that we prepared that spring and summer, it was widely discussed in the dairy publications that it wasn't too bad. And then it hit us during a week in October that was very hot. And so you had cows at the end of the summer that were really tired. If you look at jerseys the wrong way at the end of October, they'll usually die. So adding in some influenza to that situation was really, really difficult in Tulare County. So we have distributed over 234,000 sets of goggles and face shields. We have distributed over 800,000 respirators. So these are things that we've taken now very seriously. A lot of the times the workers will dispose of them at the end of the shift, which is why the number is high. But to the extent that we can, we've really tried to protect the workers. But because it only presents itself as conjunctivitis, you're on a farm, you might have an itchy eye, there might be some alfalfa hay, there might be something there that just doesn't really trigger you to think that you might be sick. And one of the scariest things about the Nevada situation is the cows are not showing any clinical signs like they are with the B3 clade here in Tulare. And so the cows often will tell the farmer very quickly, way before the milk tests, that there's something wrong. They'll start to produce off, they'll start to be very lethargic. That is not the situation that we've seen in Nevada. And that's very scary for someone like me, trying to advise people to protect their workers themselves because there's no clinical signs. So I'm not sure if that opened up more questions, but
Yeah, it kind of does, but that's what we're here for. So that's a good thing. So sometimes it's easy to tell whether or not a cow's infected, and sometimes no way you can tell.
Well, with the bee clade, which is the one that Dr. Maurice referenced earlier, there's no real ambiguity there. The dairy farmer, most of our cows are tracked with pedometers, and so they actually can see how much they're ruminating. If the cow is not taking enough steps that day, I kid you not, most of these cows are tracked for fat and protein better than any bodybuilder. And so they will know very quickly if that cow is off within the first few hours. And what we saw with this particular virus is you'd go to bed, dairy farmer, everything's fine. 2 or 3 in the morning, all the pedometers are going off at the same time. So this has been a challenge. But we have to look on the brighter side, because we can see now that, as Dr. Murray said, it's endemic. We're really trying to prepare for the future, for the next wave of infection. And so we've really started to step up our biosecurity measures. This week, CDFA will be announcing a whole new approach to how we do things on the dairy. We very much collaborated and look forward with that. I think that the
California Department of Food and Agriculture.
Thank you. So we have tried to adopt a One Health approach, which has been adopted by the California Department of Public Health in response to some of the lessons learned from COVID. And that means more agency coordination, more communication between Cal OSHA, CDPH, and CDFA, all of the departments essentially that regulate us. But there was an initial reaction, especially towards late summer, that it wasn't going to be that impactful if it ever hit. And then it hit, and we got to see the real results.
And it's Dr. Patesky said it's seasonal too, so it'll ebb and flow a little bit, I guess, right?
Well, as with seasonal influenza, things change, and so I'm not sure that I look forward to that change. This striking dairies and being very specific to bovine mammary tissue, that's a smart virus. And it didn't, there's a number of ways that they think fomate transmission happened, meaning it got communicating from a poultry worker to a dairy farm over and over and over again. That's how they believe this particular one learned. But I don't want to steal the thunder from the epidemiologist, because she may have some additional thoughts on that.
Yes, let's not let that happen. Might have to depopulate somebody.
So
but that was a different virus.
I want to get in front of that statement for just a second, because it's making me cringe and die inside every time you say it. Reducing viral load is not murder. Okay? We need to reduce viral load, which is why there are steps being taken to prevent more outbreaks of the virus so that it doesn't have an opportunity to mutate with human influenza. And so I really want to make sure that we're thinking about that, because it is the worst thing in the world for a farmer to see this happen, whether it's for cows or poultry. And poultry farmers make about 1/3 from that indemnification payment from what it costs them to raise that bird. So I get a lot of these questions. We are reducing viral load. It is in the name of public health that we are taking these drastic steps.
How often have you had to do that so far?
Well, dairy industry, we don't get indemnified, so we've not had to, and maybe we can talk about additional biosecurity. We have had to cull animals that have not come back to production, but we do not, there's no indemnification for dairy cow.
What does quarantining, what entails a quarantine of a herd?
So quarantine means that your bulk tank test has come back positive. And then there is usually a serology or a blood test of the cattle herd. There's select veterinarians. Every single dairy farmer works with a veterinarian on site almost every single day, especially with this outbreak. But quarantine means a number of things. Cattle cannot leave or be transported off the farm except with permission from CDFA. And so if they need to move calves around, they have to get permission to move to a very specific facility. And so in order to reduce the amount of animals being moved and therefore hopefully contain the virus, that biosecurity measure is a huge change on a dairy under quarantine.
And I presume they're not allowed to be slaughtered, sold for slaughter.
Cows that have HPIA are only allowed to go directly to slaughter.
I see. What about their milk? Is that discarded then?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Questions?
Is the entire tank discarded, or just do they keep them in hospital pens so that they're separated from the rest of the herd?
That was our initial reaction in October of 2024. Dairy cows are herd animals, and what we discovered very quickly is that killed them faster. They get very depressed. They don't like to be separated from the herd. And so we had to separate kind of the lots, basically it was all or nothing. They either all got separated and the virus spread anyway. Pen to pen to pen to pen, dairy to dairy to dairy.
So you had to call a large percentage of a herd?
So what happens is their milk is taken. You can't just stop lactation. Those of you who've been through that can respect that statement. And so that milk is discarded, which is oftentimes where the barn cats, this is something that we started to see very quickly. Cats and bird flu don't do well. It really, really swells their brains. In fact, that's how this was discovered. I'll make sure I'll leave something on the table for the scientists involved in that. But their milk is discarded, and essentially the healthy ones continue to milk. But that's why the testing of the bulk tanks is so important every single day, several times a day.
Where is it discarded?
So we are required to pasteurize it, and then it will usually go with the flush water and into the lagoon after it's pasteurized. We are not allowed to just simply discard it because of the risks to external wildlife. That is part of our quarantine order, is to pasteurize any and all milk.
And pasteurization is effective.
So we should probably start with that.
I have a question.
Dairy products that are pasteurized are safe for consumption, and that's a very important point.
I have a question. I'm very impressed of how you are going to be working together to solve this problem. What strikes me is this is not just in California, and now that the CDC is not allowed to give information, how are you going to be working with other states to solve this?
That would be a question for any of you, by the way. If that order from the administration affects your work.
There are some communications that are going out now. It seems to still be somewhat limited, but there's a biweekly briefing that HHS gives on farm workers and avian flu specifically, and that did occur last week, or the last time they had it. It did actually go forward and occur. And I know our public health laboratory said that they've been getting communications from CDC. So communication is starting to flow again. I think it's maybe little by little or program by program, but it is starting to flow again. And USDA, I believe, has been communicating also. So that's one of the big state-to-state communications we need, like for knowing what's happening in Nevada, is through USDA.
Just to add to that too, thank you, Dr. Minnick. USDA, of course, is the federal governing body of it, and then being so diverse in the United States, we have State Department of Agriculture, Dr. Jones being the state veterinarian, and then of course California being even more diverse and being large in its agriculture production has the county level. Many other states solely deal with the State Department of Agriculture, and we are fortunate enough to have such a diverse agriculture in California, and so they go down to the county level, and so county, state, federal. So Dr. Jones, all the hundreds of calls she's probably on in a week, she's probably an additional 100 with her federal partners through APHIS, Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, through USDA, and doing those as well.
That's a smile of a woman who loves her job.
Yeah, she must. She's been doing it for quite some time.
I hope so.
I do want to add something too, and
Go ahead.
Anya, please correct me if I misspeak. So on a normal basis, there's this normal mortality within dairy's animal production. Being Tulare County and being such a high level of a dairy county and state, we've had issues with mortality over the years, especially high months. With this endemic, right? Endemic. We have not seen those high levels of mortality. We have not seen rendering facilities being stopped, being inundated with excess amount of coal animals in that sense. It has not been necessarily, and maybe I misspoke, above average per se. So there really hasn't been a extremely high level of mortality when it comes to dairy due to H5N1. Again, different from poultry because it is a depopulation, but for dairy, it hasn't been a ginormous amount in comparison to other years where there's not even a virus at all.
On that note, it was actually pretty bad in the beginning of October 2024, but we had a really terrible heat wave here that first week of October. It was horrendous. The cows didn't like it, but the state last month reported almost a 10% drop in milk production. That's millions and millions of pounds. And so that caught people's attention, so the cows are not coming back at the level of production that they were. And they've only had a 6-7 month period to recover. In some cases, they're still trying to recover. And so that's something that the dairy industry is watching very carefully because it ultimately affects beef markets. It affects, to bring a dairy cow into a herd, it's about a 3-year process. You wait. We don't have a huge replacement stock right now. And so that's something that sadly we'll probably see more out-of-state milk filling contracts, which hasn't happened since 1984.
3 years from a calf to a producing milk cow. Okay. Has it peaked, and how are you doing on repressing this infestation, for want of a better word? Chris or Anya?
The cows.
Yeah, in mostly in dairy, I'm talking about.
Restate that, Paul, if you don't mind.
How are you doing on repressing it? And has it peaked? Has the infestation in dairy herds and other areas of ag, has it reached a
Herd immunity.
Yeah.
I hate that word.
I don't know.
I
don't
think
know
that,
if I've immunity.
so it has peaked. We're seeing 1 to 2 dairies a week become quarantined, where we were seeing 20, 30, 40 at a time.
Okay, yeah.
And so right now we're sitting at just under 500 that are still under quarantine. The north coast of California has not had a single case of this. And so they are being studied in exhaustion, I hope, because they have a really thick dairy poultry overlay up there. They also have millions and millions of people. And so it has been a public health priority for a One Health approach to make sure that we are keeping the Bay Area HPAI free, at least on the dairy side. We're trying to do everything we can, which includes not moving. We're preemptively not moving animals up north. They're not buying bull calves like they normally would, because everyone's a suspect when you're not really sure how it's spreading. So that's, I think, to answer your question, it has peaked. But the immunity conversation is a really hard one. Dairy in particular, there's always new cows coming into the scene. That's like, fresh meat for the virus. We are seeing some effects long term in the calves, and so that's very concerning. So I'm not relying on a herd immunity strategy. That's why the increase in biosecurity is so important for both the dairy and poultry sector. But we're also really hopeful that the development of vaccine will really move us along.
Okay, you're not at a point yet with vaccines that you're real satisfied with, I guess.
Well, that would be a decision by USDA. And this is also tricky because we're talking about food and commercial consumption. So that means the FDA would have to be heavily involved in this, as they are. But there's also trade ramifications. As was mentioned earlier, poultry folks have some really tight trade barriers on what they can do with their animals. It's just as tight for dairy. We have a lot of clients in Southeast Asia that, they're very, very lukewarm on this. And so I think there's a lot of progress being made on a warp speed development. But yeah, unfortunately, no one wants to jump the gun too fast on vaccines.
Okay. Dr. Minnick, how does this affect people? We had any cases yet, and how is that being treated?
Yes, absolutely. Tulare County, not too long after our first dairies were found to be infected, did indeed find a confirmed case in a human, and we, as of today, have 18 confirmed cases of human H5N1. These were all dairy workers. Most of them did work with milking cows, so actively milking them, as was stated before. Milk splashes around, body fluids splash around, tails flick you. These are big animals, and you're going to have a lot of contact with them. So public health has been very proactive in putting out the PPE, the personal protective equipment, goggles, face shields, masks, gowns and gloves for workers, way before this event even happened. We actually even had a tabletop exercise in August, a few weeks before the first introduction into our dairy herd happened, where we brought all the partners together, CDFA, USDA, our ag commissioner, public health.
In August, you were ahead of the curve. Yeah.
And so we talked about, what will we do, what will be our response, and of course, from the public health point of view, a lot of it is we're focused on protecting the workers, monitoring the workers. So any dairy that has H5N1 is asked, to monitor their workers, and if someone develops symptoms, to report. All of our cases that we had did have the conjunctivitis, which is the pink eye. In some of them, it was a pretty distinctive pink eye, not like what you might think with like little kids, but I mean like really, really red, like very, very red, very irritated. I mean, you would not miss it. You would not think, oh, maybe it's just an allergy. You would not think that. So they all had that. About half of them also had other flu-like symptoms. And so that was something we had not really been expecting. We thought it might just be the conjunctivitis, but a lot of them did also report normal kind of flu, malaise, aches, aches and pains, some respiratory symptoms, but that was a lot less. So for the most part, it was the conjunctivitis.
Is it painful to the
It can
patients?
be. Some of them reported some pain, some reported itchiness, some maybe just minor discomfort.
Just curious, how long does it last?
It lasted in our cases anywhere from usually 5 to 10 days.
I presume that when a dairy worker is identified as contracts this illness, that the herd's quarantined right away.
Well, the herds were all quarantined to begin with because they were all positive herds from the beginning for the most part. Sometimes a worker would present perhaps, for healthcare, and we wouldn't necessarily know which herd they came from. But once the peak of the herds in Tulare County happened, pretty much most of the herds were probably infected at that point. So they were all pretty much quarantined.
How long does it take to present if someone's infected?
That would be hard to know because you'd have to know the exact moment that they were exposed, and you wouldn't necessarily know that because they're working every day with the cows. So which day was it that the exposure happened, and then when did they get sick? But for most flu, it's usually going to be 48 hours plus or minus.
Okay, and wasn't there one fatality in California?
Not in California. The only fatality from H5N1 so far has been in Louisiana, and that was the D genotype.
Okay, so I'm just wondering how the symptoms progressed in that individual. Do you have any idea?
Again, that was the D genotype. So that one is the one that's the most predominant among wild birds right now, not among the dairy cows, except for Nevada. That one is known to be more serious. I mean, we've had a very, very small number of human cases of that genotype, but the ones that we have had have been a little more serious in humans. So it does, this H5N1 virus, I'll go back to the B genotype that the dairies are experiencing. That virus specifically likes the mammary cells, right, in the cow's udder, and it also likes, for mammals, it specifically likes the eye, the conjunctival, the tear glands, and those cells. But also it has receptors that seem like it could also attach to the lower respiratory system. So that's what concerns people too, is if you did get it kind of deeper into your system, it might cause a more serious disease. And that's probably similar to what the D genotype has. It can definitely cause a more lower respiratory tract, more serious infection.
It sounds like you're already taking as many precautions as you can with distribution of PPE and monitoring herds and reporting quarantine, reporting them as quickly as possible. Is there anything else you can do?
The other thing that we did is anytime we identified a case, even before the case was confirmed, we did provide or prescribe at least Tamiflu, which is the antiviral medication. And that's, again, to try to help prevent the virus from replicating more inside the person, to help prevent them personally, but also help prevent it from spreading to their contacts, their household members, their family members, or the community.
And I'll add on that before your question. So the County Department of Public Health, agency has dairy inspectors, and so most of all the rest of California, there's only a certain amount that the county does the dairy inspections. With a large portion of Tulare County being quarantined, they kind of held off because they had the biosecurity, which was very important. They just recently, within the last couple of weeks, brought back the dairy inspectors onto the many of the dairies throughout Tulare County. So we have boots on the ground a little bit more. Some of the dairies that have been unquarantined, released from quarantine, and they're the ones that know the dairymen, know the workers, know the herd. And so we've been able to reintroduce many of the dairy inspectors within Tulare County and Kings County to have a little bit more familiarity and boots on the ground to know if there's any kind of those symptoms re-arising too.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. It's on.
I have a question. So with it sounds like everything's under control here, but it sounds like it's going to get big regardless. We're doing everything we can to fix it here in California, but there's gigantic herds in Texas, and there's birds that migrate. I mean, I'm just kind of wondering where it's all going from here.
It's kind of funny. Your map had very few cases in Texas. That's kind of weird.
Yeah, so the South in general doesn't have as much habitat and doesn't have as many layers and turkeys, which seem to be a little more susceptible. The initial spillover event happened, though, in a dairy in Texas and then spread from there. I think to your point, so in the U.S., we have about 45,000 commercial poultry premises. We have about 20,000 plus dairies, I believe, and about 60,000 plus swine facilities. Those are a lot of different premises to protect. And we have tens of millions of waterfowl that are interfacing with many of those farms. That's as I mentioned earlier, that's a hard needle to thread as far as how do we protect that, especially if we're truly dealing with an endemic virus that's going to come back over and over again as ducklings and goslings. There's been some research that suggests that 40% of ducklings and goslings that come down in the fall are already positive by the time they're coming down, because it's being passed from the mother. So it's hard to see just because the virus is so ubiquitous in so many different environments. We're finding it in lagoon water, wetlands, human wastewater. We're finding it in wild birds, domestic birds, wild mammals, domestic mammals. So it is very complex. I did just very briefly, I made a disease model back in 2022 that basically suggested we were going to get hammered. I've had other people ask me recently, well, can you make another disease model? And my answer is no, because back then, the model had wild birds, waterfowl, and it had chickens, basically, and turkeys. And basically, that's a very simple disease model to make. If I was going to make a disease model now, it would have so many variables in it, with all these different tolerances that we don't really know the probabilities of, that it would just be a big question mark as to what's going to happen next.
But recently, in response to that concern, the USDA did proffer a national bulk tank testing program of all states that have dairy, which is how this Nevada clade was found, through the bulk tank testing program. And so Texas, which may have had some reporting challenges early on is now reporting regularly without choice.
This question is for the epidemiologist. When, in your opinion, when do you think this virus is going to start jumping from human to human? You knew that question was coming.
That's the big question, right? Well, most of us here, I think, are old enough that we've lived through a flu pandemic already. If you remember, back in 2009, we had H1N1. No one was expecting that. All of a sudden, we just started hearing about respiratory virus cases coming from, Mexico, San Diego, that area. They identified H1N1 that was in the spring. By the fall, it was around the whole world, right? And we had a vaccine out already by that fall. And Tamiflu. So we do have antivirals. We have a very good vaccination system for influenza. What this virus is going to do, it's definitely really concerning. When you look at the number of different mammal species, there have been marine mammal outbreaks with H5N1 in the last 2 years. Huge die-offs of, seals, I guess, or dolphins. It's just everywhere, and it's infecting so many different animals. I mean, they mentioned the cats. The cats get it as a nervous system disease, so it's very serious in cats. But one thing you notice about the virus is you can be looking at this, we're like, oh, the dairies, it's gonna jump from the dairy, and then the next thing you know, it's somewhere totally different that you never would have even thought of. So you just never know what they're gonna do for sure. But we do what we can with what we know, and that's looking at the dairies, looking at the human-animal interface where the viral load is, right? Where the really highest viral load is, where it may be mutating, has the greatest chance to mutate and become something new.
Real quick, Dr. Mimic, can you and all of you guys confirm there's not been a case from human to human yet, correct? That we are aware of.
Not that has been confirmed, as far as I'm aware. There have been, reports of people around certain cases that they didn't recognize as H5N1 right away, and so there really wasn't a good opportunity to test the people around them soon enough to know for sure, but they haven't identified the human-to-human for sure. There may have been with some past clades, because this virus, H5N1, has been infecting humans since 1997. It started off in China. There's been different genotypes that have circulated around the world. It especially is prevalent in Southeast Asia, but also the Middle East. Egypt had a lot of cases, back a number of years ago. So the virus has been around for a while, and so there may have been some very limited, sometimes the healthcare worker, very close contact with a family member. I don't think I can't remember for sure it's been absolutely confirmed or not. Certainly not with this latest variation yet, but.
Yeah, I have a two-part question. So somebody mentioned backyard enthusiasts. So I don't have chickens, but I do keep ringneck doves in an aviary in my backyard. And I don't get a lot of waterfowl that visit, but I do get a lot of scrub jays, warblers, wild birds. So I'm wondering what the risk is there, either to my flock or to me or to my dogs that are in the same area. And then the second part of the question is, on Sunday, March 2nd, there's a bird show here in Visalia. And it seems a little counterintuitive to me that those sorts of things are allowed to happen still, given the fact that this is here. And I know these are parakeets and parrots and not chickens, but it's avian influenza. So I would just like you to comment on that, if you could, please.
So I'll mention a little bit about just the limited ability to stop everything. We all come from, we're all post-COVID era, and so it's one of those things. If you stop everything, is that going to fix it all? As I mentioned, we have I'll bring it back to dairy, and one of the calls, they had one of the largest dairy expositions in just 2 months ago in Madison, Wisconsin. There was zero outbreak. Zero outbreak. Everything was great, all clean. When they brought them back, there was how many thousands of dairy cattle there?
It's like 9,000.
Yeah, 9,000 dairy. They all brought them back. They were all clean. And so it's one of those things, do you just stop the world? And neither here or there, my personal opinion on that. It's kind of one of those things. It could also be that no one knows about that. I mean, that could be another thing. So it is really an ebb and flow of mitigating what's there and what you can versus seizing everything, and then we go into another episode of animal COVID in that sense. And is that so? That really to answer your question, but kind of give you a little context of maybe some of the thought process.
And when you look at the risk, if these are pet parrots, presumably they're not allowed to fly around free very much. They're probably contained somewhat. And so what is the risk to bringing in pet parrots as a show versus the wild birds that are all around us right now, that we know are probably carrying the virus? So.
And so here's again another needle you got to thread. So the state banned all poultry shows until further notice. So there was a decision made to
and all dairy shows.
Yeah, and
dairy shows. Okay, thank you. It's funny when I read things, I just focus on poultry, so there is this kind of triaging of like, well, where's the risk highest, and how are we gonna, not to use this term again, how are we gonna thread that needle for allowing people to still do things that are not 100% safe, but are not the primary reservoir. I think one of the things we got to remember, until further notice, it's still. Waterfowl are the primary reservoir as far as wild animals, and the complexity of how they interface with all kinds of other species, that means they can transmit the virus to these other species. California, we're in an interesting situation. We've lost 95% of our natural wetlands. So when we have these 6 to 8 million waterfowl that come down in the fall and hang out until sometime in the spring, they have less and less habitat to roost on. And there's some disease modelers out there that have suggested that that's one of the reasons that this virus seems to be so ubiquitous as far as how it's transmitting to other wild animals, because there's less habitat. So they're intermingling and commingling in ways that we historically have not had.
So probably pretty low risk factor from waterfowl to a scrub jay, in your opinion, or?
I don't know.
Just going back to the first part of my question, my backyard flock, that's what I would like to hear.
Well, so here's where it gets complex, because okay, is your backyard flock, are you close to like a wetland or ponds?
No,
or?
I'm 4 blocks away.
Okay. So if what you're describing to me sounds like low risk, but we are dealing with something that, like I said, you can't model. So weird random stuff does happen. I tell people now who have backyard flocks that they should wear a surgical mask, just to be cautious.
And to be clear, these aren't chickens; they're ringneck doves.
Understood. But I just tell people that because birds are flighty, they create aerosols. I'm not asking them to wear N95 because I feel like, again, to your point, we got to thread this needle of what people are most likely going to do, and where we can kind of nudge them in the right direction. But I think that's a reasonable thing to ask someone to do. It's up to them, obviously, what they ultimately do. But now I'm telling people, in addition to boots, in addition to dedicated clothing, put a surgical mask on.
If you really want to go down that rabbit hole, like are scrub jays a villain? There are, I'd say it's fairly incomplete, but there are a number of databases that are attached to the USDA APHIS website where they've eagles, hawks. I mean, they've looked at peri-domestic and domestic wildlife, and they've, people that turn dead birds in is a thing, especially now.
By the way.
Okay, so yeah, you can kind of look there and see if there's ever been a confirmed. I found myself looking for a number of species that dairy protects, like the tricolored blackbird. We actually provide habitat for them regularly. It's a wonderful sustainability partnership. So far, we haven't seen any tricoloreds ever show positive for this avian flu. So, just kind of sleep at night.
What is the danger of wild bird species extinction?
So there's a wonderful professor at Davis, Marcella Ullhart, that's done a significant amount of work on that specific. She works at the One Health Institute at UC Davis, and she's done a lot of work in South America, where what's happened on that continent is unprecedented. High-path AI has never been down there, and I've got a map that we made that basically shows all the different species, albatross, all kinds of different wild birds on the Galapagos, throughout the entirety of South America. And it has had a significant impact on all kinds of different avian species where their populations are decreasing. One of the things that we've noticed were snow geese. So waterfowl hunters, to their credit, have done a very good job of protecting various species, including snow geese. So snow geese have been high mortality rates, but their overall populations have not been affected because one thing we've done very well is we've done actually a good job of protecting snow geese for hunters, for example.
One thing I wanted to add before your next question is I sit on the state agriculture state agriculture education advisory board, and I think education is extremely vital to the next generations of the world, but America and California. One thing that Anya mentioned, that all the dairy shows have been canceled in California. Not to pull on all of your guys' heartstrings on your children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, but many, many hundreds and thousands of hours were invested into their 4-H and FFA projects that they were not able to show or not able to sell, and able to do that because of those shows being canceled. Again, neither here or there do I agree or disagree on the pathway of that, but it kind of goes to your point of shutting that down. You are kind of shutting down that next generation of agricultural education that's happening and that workload going it. And so you really have to gauge all the collateral damage that happens when shutting everything down. It's not by any means, I would never want to be in this situation. Thankfully, we have Dr. Jones and all of you guys in this to have to make that decision on the ramifications of shutting all the way down. What do you gauge? The next generation of education, public health, do you have the shows, spreading of the animals? So it is really a very, very complex situation when it goes to making those decisions.
Absolutely, and I agree, and I also am an ex-FFA member.
Yeah. Great.
I have a question. We've been talking about dairy cows. What about dairy goats and dairy sheep?
No, you're good. You're good on.
They have not confirmed this in dairy. They've looked. They can't find it. There was one suspect goat or dairy at some point, but they were never able to confirm it.
In California, correct?
Correct.
There were
Sorry.
some goats very early on in 2024, I believe.
In Texas.
Like Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, yeah. It wasn't in California. We've not confirmed it in dairy or sheep.
But I believe those were also kids, like young goats too, which could also make a difference.
And just to add to that, before you, sir, you have to look at the actual logistics of milking a cow versus dairy goat or any other dairy commodity. Most of the time, we're in 2025. Most of the milking stanchions are off the ground. They're not on the ground anymore. They're usually eye level, to help with worker safety, workers' backs and whatnot. And so they're in the face versus dairy goats are not in that high production circular barn, and so they're still on the ground. So the likelihood of getting splashed in the face, or you have a lot more distance, and the milk production is extremely less than a dairy cow produces for a dairy goat, and so you kind of see that difference there. But very valid question.
Do we know for sure that milk, which is from one of these tanks that have been tested and pasteurized, or eggs from one of these infected birds are dangerous for humans to consume?
Like you're talking about, is it safe to consume something that's not pasteurized, or?
No. The milk's been pasteurized, but it's been destroyed.
Correct.
For safety, but do
Correct.
we know that is being extra safe? And what about the eggs in the store? Is there a panic about, that you might contract something, an illness from one of the eggs?
So two separate questions. We know that the existing pasteurization technology does kill the virus. Whether we're got healthy cows and we're processing their dairy, their raw milk for dairy products, that's all safe. But on the egg side, and I can't really, I don't want to step on poultry's thunder here, but the reason there's an egg shortage is because there's not enough layers.
Yeah.
They've been viral load reduced.
The D word, yeah, I get it.
And I'll add that about eggs just to give you another layer of.
So,
Dr. Pateski, are eggs from a contaminated fowl harmful to humans?
Okay, so the good part about when chickens laying hens get high-path AI is they basically stop production before they die. Now, is there a scenario where the fecal material on the shell for like that egg that popped out right before it got sick and stopped producing, or to have some viral load, it doesn't really have a tropism for that specific tissue, the egg, but there is some research that has shown that there can be some virus inside the egg, but we're talking now about like, kind of a very low probability event, because A, the chickens, when they get sick, they don't produce eggs anymore, and B, the virus doesn't really focus or localize in that tissue. We're down to 4 million laying hens in California. If I was here last year, I would have said 10 million laying hens. So we've gotten hammered on that side of the production.
Which is why there are no eggs at Costco. Go ahead, Chris.
Just to add to that too, egg inspections happen at the federal, state, and local county level. And so we have a contract through CDFA through APHIS, the USDA, to go and look at eggs in the market. Obviously, we don't test them in that sense, but we look for bloody checks. Variety, making sure they're the correct size, and so it's egg enforcement, and so there is California being one of the heaviest regulated states in the United States. They have the heaviest standards too for egg quality and egg control too. So we are out there. We are looking for, like I said, bloody checks, fecal matter, feathers, size, quantity, standardization, and if it's not, we enforce that. We pull it off the market. We red tag it, and it's not there for consumer consumption. Can we get all of them? No, but in a perfect world, that's our testing standard, and so there is enforcement there again at the county, state, and federal level. And the egg gets cooked anyway. Yes, I mean I don't know how much raw egg consumption is happening these days, but maybe bodybuilders, I guess.
Rocky.
Yes, thank you so much for this conversation today. You guys have mentioned dairy workers very little in terms of like the larger population, in terms of how they're getting informed from their employers. When a dairy is quarantined, is there like a public notice for the workers to like, are they informed? Is there a requirement? Like, how are workers being informed about?
So when a dairy comes under quarantine, it falls under a very specific directive from Cal OSHA, where we are required daily to provide safety checks, fit tests of those respirators, and inform them of the signs and symptoms. We've done really good jobs there, we think. Encouraging them to report continues to be at the top of our herdsmen's list. It is a challenging environment right now for ag workers. And so we're trying to make sure that they know they will be paid. We are required to give them 5 days of pay. And we are required to make sure that report to the local health department if there is any signs or symptoms. So it has been a step-by-step process. We have a population here who is very COVID shy. They're also vaccine hesitant. And so talking about illness has been something that we've had to reintroduce into our daily safety checks, but it is a huge priority.
And I would just add, too, that people know very quickly if the dairy is infected. So the cows are showing symptoms, the quarantine is going on, the workers all talk to each other. They know right away if the dairy has been infected, I think. So, but we, as public health, do outreach to the dairy owner, provide all kinds of materials. We also put it through Western United Dairies, through the Ag Commissioner, through the creameries, any source we can get to make sure that the information is getting to the workers on how to protect themselves. The health department does put out some social media and other issues. How much that reaches our target audience, is a little bit questionable. So we really do appreciate the collaboration with the trusted messengers and those who are actually out there on the farms. But we do provide a lot of materials to the dairy owner and to their occupational health
I'm following up on this.
employer.
Just a follow-up to that
as
for
well.
fit test. If there's a respirator, the employee has to be fit tested. So they can't have a beard. They can't have facial hair. They actually have to be doctor fit tested to wear that. Same in the pesticide arena too. And so that's a whole nother Cal OSHA issue that we face. If you do have facial hair and you don't just want to wear a surgical mask or an N95, you want to wear a respirator, there is other additional levels. And so it is complex in that. And Anya's team and public health is working hard to get that information out. And there has been numerous Cal OSHA on-site visits throughout the Central Valley, making sure that everyone is in compliance and protecting their employees as much as possible. Sorry,
I appreciate that additional information because I know people who work in dairies, and I've had those conversations. I mean, it is predominantly Spanish-speaking, the ones that I interact with, and they're not informed, at least from what I've heard. And so that's where my concern comes from. And so I don't know where the transmission is between you guys telling the owners and it getting to the workers themselves. And so that's my concern.
Is it possible that non-English speakers are falling through the cracks?
So I'll speak on a little bit less on the dairy side, into more of the farm workers side. So dairy is not our main point at which we enforce that commissioner's office. We do a large portion of our pesticide regulation, our pesticide use enforcement, which go hand in hand with a lot of the workers on the dairy. They oftentimes milk, but they're also in the field because many dairies grow commodities. That is a constant struggle. We do worker health and safety protection audits. We go out, and again, this is in the more commodities in the dairy, and go and speak to these communities, speak to these a few workers, farm workers, and let them know their rights, let them know, and making sure that the crew boss or the owner, the grower, is protect them to the best of possibility and issue violations to them if they're not doing that. Again, that's more on the commodity base, on the pesticide regulation rather than the farm workers. Obviously in a perfect world, all we'd want compliance. But that is something that we've dealt with as has been an angst for many, many, many years, trying to just get to everyone. I think Dr. Minnick and Anya said everyone's still a COVID shy. In general, we have staff, at least in our pesticide division, we have 11 staff that speak bilingual or trilingual. And so we send them out and they're a little bit more familiar and are able to speak. But again, that's only that small portion of the larger community. And so, yeah, it is a challenge. And I think everyone, especially in this day of 2025, really working hard because education is key. Getting them to know, calling us. And we have this huge thing. People are fearful of local government, or industry, public health. They think they're getting in trouble. Maybe we won't go there. That's a whole nother probably forum. Talk about, recent news, but they're hesitant. They think they're going to get in trouble if they're speaking up. And so we as local enforcement, but also promoters of the local ag industry, really, really have to work hard to try to find the niche to really be like, we are open space. It is not to, it's to help you, educate you. And again, it's not perfect, but we really work hard to do that. That is something that's very important.
Kind of following up on that a little bit. Oh, Dr. Patesky,
I think one thing I was just going to mention, so, I'm a life scientist and, I'm not to divulge everything. I'm 51 years old. I've worked at a university, for a good 15 years now. And I think to your point, the biggest weakness that we have is we need more social scientists who are going to figure out how to increase participation rate in surveillance, in vaccination, in outreach, because we have all these data that get siloed, and we're kind of at this point now where, like the technology I work on, all these other ideas that are out there, they won't work unless we get buy-in from farmers and the community, and you can't get that right now. Like we unfortunately historically just didn't invest not only in maybe technology, but also we didn't invest in relationships, and you can't do that right now. It doesn't work at least on the poultry side. I can speak to that. Like I know these farmers, but on the poultry side, but they're stressed, right? And the last thing they want is people snooping around, and I get that, they're human, but I think once this calms down, we're going to need to take a much more holistic approach to how we engage our community, because it's been a real problem.
I could talk to you a little bit about how difficult it is to get a farmer to participate in a panel like this. So I know what you're talking about. But let's follow up on that a little bit with Dr. Minnick. What are the steps that your department would take in the event of a further spread of this particular illness, not just through the ag community, but through the larger community? What would you do?
So you're talking human to human spread?
Sure.
Well,
let's
that
go
would
right
be,
to the,
Again, that would be a brand new thing happening in North America, maybe in the world. So I think that the CDC would get involved right away. CDPH, the Department of Public Health, would get involved right away. I mean, we'd go back to like COVID, right? It would be similar to COVID times. But I think we learned a lot from COVID, and some of it good, some of it bad. So, but I think that we would have to, it's going to all depend on the exact scenario. Is it something where it's limited spread, like just among close contacts and the healthcare workers who are taking care of a case? Is it something where it's going through communities? I think a lot of what happens too depends on people's reaction. Like during COVID, the schools suddenly decided to shut down. Public health didn't tell the schools to shut down. We were as shocked as everyone else when the schools suddenly decided to all shut down. So sometimes things kind of just evolve and happen. We're a society, and people react the way they're going to react. So, but as far as we've learned a lot from, unfortunately, a number of different epidemics that have happened even since COVID, with Mpox. There's always the specter of, Ebola. It keeps popping up in Africa. There's always there's been a number. We had a measles. It wasn't really an outbreak, but it was a measles case that, we had to take our normal public health steps to help monitor the situation and help try to prevent it from becoming an outbreak, because measles is one of the most infectious diseases. Luckily, we do have, a good vaccine for that. So I think we would fall back on our standard public health response. Exactly what we would do. It's a little hard to predict for sure. But we have our. The good thing about this one is, I think a vaccine would be coming along very quickly, and we do have Tamiflu. So we have right from the start, we have an antiviral, which so far is effective.
I think that changing the decentralization of all the information, which Dr. Maurice mentioned a minute ago, sorry, I can't say your last name, is really important as a learning lesson, because, and that is something that, for better or worse, the federal administration is really signaling they're going to change immediately. They want to, so some of the challenges that the state encountered with this particular outbreak had to do with all of the resources that were scattered, especially when APHIS, the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, got involved. And so making sure that we revisit that as more of a One Health approach, a centralized database that includes worker information and proper contact, that it can flag the local health department immediately if there's any kind of cases, that it can also check in with the local health department that the health checks are happening every single day, that the fit checks are happening fit tests, are happening every single day, and that it's not so goes to USDA, goes to APHIS, comes down to CFA, goes to Tulare. That's a waking nightmare, because what happens on the ground is the dairy farmer sees a new caseworker every other week. And that is not a building relationship for trust, as was mentioned. And so really re-centralizing it to more of a localized approach is something that I will be advocating for very loudly.
Anything else? Anything else from the panel? Terrific. I want to thank you all. You've been a terrific panel tonight. Let's give a nice round of applause. Dr. Maurice, which apparently is easier, Dr. Minnick, Chris Greer, and Anya.
Yeah. That works. Like Tanya without the T.
That was a terrific discussion, wasn't it? I just learned so much, and it was very well articulated by all our panel members. I reiterate my gratitude, my thanks to you all. Thank you very much. those of you who live elsewhere, please enjoy your time in Tulare County here this week. Anya, I hope you do especially.
Oh, yeah. I'm here a lot, guys. So if you ever
Yeah, it sounds like you're pretty familiar with
Chris and I to tag team stuff. We're here a lot.
Okay. Next month, it's also going to be the 11th, March 11th, here at Tulare County Voices at 210. We will be examining an emerging issue in our communities, and it's titled Having a Baby in Tulare County. I don't know how many of you have been following this, but there have been a reduction in the number of places and the doctors whom you can go to for pregnant women to deliver their babies in different hospitals and in different practices. We plan to examine that issue next month. It's going to be very interesting, so I hope you're here to listen to that and also provide your insights and questions. Until then, please enjoy the World Ag Expo and don't pay too much for that tractor now. All right, thank you. Good night.
And then I have my business cards in the very interest, so if you guys have anything, I'm happy to help. And if I can't answer the question, I will forward you to someone that can. Yeah, right? I don't know about that. I'm not that good.
Doctor.